Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of February, so 2 whole months of winter have gone. Spring is not so far away here in the Northern Hemisphere. It's show number 211. It's actually quite a nice, pleasant, sunny day outside at the moment. So what have we got for you in today's show? Well, last call for tonight's Science of Being Seen in-depth special live webcast to give you a little bit of detail on that before I get into the news. We'll look at the decision to have any colour of bollard you like in Crouch End, so long as it's black. The DVSA are under fire as they've been cancelling car tests due to pencil rubber and hair on carpets. Leeds is to get motorcycles in bus lanes, at least on a 1-year trial basis. Excuse me, learner riders in France are going to be taught to filter. And Danish police will be seizing bikes if they are ridden in an insane manner. We'll also look at a 3-wheeled electric bike based on the Yamaha Tri-City or Tricity, I'm not sure which one it is, excuse me, which is designed for police use. And we'll round the show off with a better biking tip. We'll be looking at, sadly, a fatal crash which happened on a hidden. I do apologise. Which happened on a blind crest. So we'll be looking at overtaking and what to do to actually protect ourselves from people who get it wrong on blind crests and hidden dips. I do apologise. I'm perfectly all right. Come on, Ryan, immediately start coughing. So settle yourselves down for the next 30 odd minutes while I crack on with 11s. Hopefully I don't cough too much. I don't know what brought that on. Okay, so before I go on with the news, just a quick reminder. February's live event is going to be a Science of Being Seen, but an in-depth special. And what I'll be doing is I'll be taking a look at how the human eye detects objects in the visual field. And it really isn't as straightforward as look and you'll see it. Now, even if you have already seen the full version of Science of Being Seen, this in-depth presentation does go into detail into some of the specific issues. And one of the phenomenons that I've mentioned in the past, phenomena, is that we seem to have 180-degree color vision all the way from right in front of us, where we get our gaze, as it's called, right out to out right in the corners of our peripheral vision. We seem to have color vision, but in fact we don't. Vision turns increasingly fuzzy and black and white away from the tightly focused zone of color vision right in front of us. So one of the questions is, how does our brain actually create this illusion of color vision? And the answer is it stitches it together from visual information it's previously collected. So we actually recycle visual information from the past because it's efficient, it's fast, and it means less work for the brain. So what we think we see in peripheral vision is actually out of date. And here's the really bad news: that can be lagging up to 15 seconds behind what's really happening. So if you're interested in this rather scary and but also very fascinating topic, join me tonight. The talk is at 8. Tickets cost £5. They're on sale till 6 p.m. just to make sure I can actually get a ticket out to late bookers. And you can book from the link below. I've just had a question from Kevin, who says he seems to recall mention of this show being recorded. Well, it is recorded and it'll be on YouTube, and I do keep it open for people to view for a few days after it is live, in case they have some kind of problem, either a breakdown in the internet or they just can't make it for some reason. So if you have booked a ticket and you cannot make it to one of these live webcasts, don't panic. The show will be available on catch up for a few days afterwards to make sure that you can get it at a convenient time. Okay, so that is that. Hopefully, see a few of you later in the day. So right, okay. So what have we got for you? Bollards. Well, now interestingly, I mentioned last show about some new bollards that are going up in Hampshire. Now they're made from sugarcane. Now I wasn't entirely convinced by the sort of carbon savings statement that the council put out. And something that occurred to me after the show is that we don't actually grow sugarcane here in the UK. So the manufacturer has to import cane waste to actually make them in the first place. Or perhaps the completed bollards are actually made outside the country. I don't know the answer to that one. So I was already questioning the mathematics of the Hampshire carbon footprint plan, which claimed that they were making huge savings in their carbon footprint by using these biopolymers for these items of street furniture. But frankly, the saving must be tiny in their county-wide scheme of things. But the fact that it would have to be imported from outside the country and shipped to the UK from somewhere like the West Indies makes me even more skeptical that they're really carbon friendly. Anyway, moving on from that, oddly enough, we have another bollard story. What's the right colour for a bollard in the street? Well, if you are a street artist who lives in Crouch End, then you're probably not thinking in terms of the conventional colours. And these are just a few of the bollards that have been repainted by an anonymous person in North London. I've seen some other photos. Some of the designs are actually rather wonderful, but I particularly liked these sort of orange and red ones. Now, I think our streets are often rather colourless. Naturally, this photograph sort of confirms that viewpoint, doesn't it? Because it's a pretty grey street scene here. But sadly, the coloured bollards haven't found favour with everyone, and they've actually fallen foul of Haringey Council, who now plan to repaint these bollards back to their original black colour. Now, somewhat to my surprise, one complaint came from someone who says they are visually impaired and that they struggle to see these bollards. Now, quite frankly, I would have found those rather easier to pick out, I would have thought, in the street scene than black painted ones, unless I suppose you happen to be colourblind in the sort of red yellow end of the spectrum. I don't know. Anyway, they are actually part of a sort of a vibrant street art scene that's recently appeared in the area. And quite frankly, having lived in Crouch End many years ago, the area could do with it. A council spokesman nevertheless said, ultimately, the bollards are road safety features and must be appropriately coloured to our specification. Defacing bollards is actually illegal under the Highways Act, and in dealing with the complaint, we followed the legal guidance. So they're all going back to black, and which is not a particularly wonderful colour for a safety feature, I would have said. But hey ho, what do I know? I just wish that the councils could manage the same sort of due diligence about levelling pavements. So that's my little grump for the morning. Elsewhere, the DVSA are under fire because tests have been cancelled due to examiners spotting something like hair on a back carpet or some bits of pencil rubber under the front seat. The latter case happened when a learner driver turned up to take the test at the DVSA's Blackpool Test Centre. The examiner apparently spotted some small pieces of pencil rubber under the front seat and turned the driver away, refused basically to take them out for test. Now, the 17-year-old had been waiting months for her test, but the examiner point blank refused to get in the car. The instructor asked for a second opinion, but the request was turned down, and there was no help from the centre manager either. Now, the father of the learner said it was the instructor's car and it was spotless, apart from a few tiny bits of rubber from when the instructor had rubbed something out in his diary. The filings weren't on the seat or anywhere the examiner would be sitting. They spent about 10 minutes trying to discuss it and sort it out, but got nowhere. Now, it seems that this isn't the first time that the examiners at the Blackpool Test Centre have refused to undertake a test, claiming cars are too dirty. And the pattern has been repeated at other test centres across England too, with one driver in Norwich being refused a test because of some mud in the footwell, another because there were strands of hair. A spokesman said the DVSA's priority is to protect our customers and staff and stop the spread of COVID-19, and guidance has been issued that cars used on driving tests must be cleaned before the test to lessen the chance of infection. Driving tests will not go ahead if this has not been followed to ensure public safety. So what actually is the guidance? Well, it appears to say that any rubbish or unnecessary items should be removed from the dashboard, footwells, door pockets, cup holders, and seats, and that the vehicle should have it be cleaned and wiped down over the dashboard and the car controls. So I can't see anything there that actually implies that the vehicle should be returned to sort of as new and undriven condition. I mean, frankly, the possibility of keeping a car completely spotless is actually non-existent. Hang on a minute, I'll just take a phone call. Sorry, this might be my vehicle coming back from the menders. Right, sorry about that. The perils of a live show. Um, yeah, that's just my camper van which needed repairing. I thought it might be ready this morning, and it is. Right, okay. So where was I? I was talking about the DVSA. As I said, I can't see anything in the guidance that says the vehicle should be returned to showroom condition. And frankly, this seems to be taking things to a ridiculous level. Clearly protecting the examiners and other staff, and even the people who are taking the training, and the instructor is still a priority with COVID still floating around. But with the tests costing £64 and a backlog at the moment of between 4 and 5 months, this is not the way to clear our long COVID waiting list. Right. Okay, so apologies again for the call there. Don't forget, if you've got a comment, if you've got a question, if you've got anything to add to the conversation, I'm more than happy to take anything you've got to say on board. I'll try to get back to you as I can during the show. If I can't manage it during the show, I will talk about it after the show. Right, so what else is going on in the world? Well, there's good news for bikers in Leeds, since the local council has approved a £40,000 trial to give PTWs access to bus lanes on the busy A65. The pilot scheme will start this spring, and it will run for at least 12 months. Now, the decision to use the A65 was taken with input from the Motorcycle Action Group, MAG, primarily because the stretch they're going to use has the widest bus lanes in Leeds, and they say this allows the safe mixing of cycles, taxis, motorcycles, and buses. Now, whilst it's good that another council is taking the plunge of getting bikes in bus lanes, The messaging about the positive impacts of bikes in bus lanes is clearly struggling to be heard, because the council report that approved the trial still argued that its impacts were uncertain, and they cited data from cities which were said to have seen an increase in both rates of motorcyclists speeding and an increase in collision rates for motorcyclists. And there were other concerns that some bus lanes use had seen an increase in cyclists injured in collisions with powered two-wheelers. Well, frankly, they would do if they're both in the bus lane. There would be an increase. It doesn't necessarily mean that there are more cyclists being injured. It doesn't necessarily mean that those in collisions wouldn't have happened outside of a bus lane. Anyway, the trial has been restricted, therefore, to this one stretch of the A65, instead of using some of the more congested and the narrower bus lanes elsewhere in the city. So Kirkstall councillors are reportedly concerned about the risk to cyclists, and they also went as far as to question the validity of the trial, since what they said is, as the A65 is the only bus lane in Leeds which is this wide, then what they're saying is that any results from that trial won't actually apply to any of the other narrower bus lanes anyway. So they say that it's simply put, the trial only tells you what will happen on this stretch of the A65. And so they said, quote, they see the risk inherent in a trial which could only have limited use in informing future policy as being unsupportable, with any benefits motorcyclists may accrue not worth discomforting and deterring cyclists nor risking injury to cyclists. Which I think is a very, very negative viewpoint. Fortunately, the cycle-loving Kirk stall councillors don't get the final say, and the council are going ahead with the trial, and they got support from local riders, not surprisingly, in the press. Marcus, for example, commented, "I'm one of the people who worked on getting this through. The thing about bus lane width is to allow buses to overtake pedal cycles and doesn't really apply to motorbikes," which is, if you think about it, a fairly obvious point once you actually apply a bit of brain to the problem. He says other areas that have allowed motorbikes to use bus lanes have actually seen a fall in the number of cyclist casualties, which I have to say is what I have seen. He also actually posed an interesting question asking why there are 24-hour bus lanes in a city that doesn't have a 24-hour bus service, which is actually an excellent point. Helen observed, I note that only the potential negatives have been referenced in this article without any reference to the positives of similar schemes nationally. As it happens, the A65 stretch of the Kirkstall Road, there is one that I used to know fairly well because my brother used to live just a couple of miles further out along the A65 when he was at university there. And oddly enough, the madman cycled into university day in, day out, summer and winter. He's still lunatic as it happens, but there we go. That's I'll keep the family history out of this. Right, okay, so what else have we got? Well, don't forget, the show goes out on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. It will normally be live. I will have to be doing a recorded version of the show this Sunday as I'm on birthday duty, I'm afraid. And I'll be away from home. So do set a reminder. You can catch up on my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK. Don't forget that all important UK, or you won't get me. You'll get somebody telling you how to sharpen horses' hooves or something. And so look forward to the 11 o'clock show, but it will be a recorded one on Sunday. Right, okay, so what's going on over in France? Well, here the news is that learner riders will actually be taught to filter. Now, this has been an on-off-on story over the last couple of years. There's been a trial going on to test whether or not filtering is safe for riders in France. Now, it's true that the authorities have always tended to turn a blind eye to filtering and lane splitting in France, but technically the practice is actually illegal, but it is pretty much universal over there. So the current trial has been extended. It's going to more department, and it'll go on till 2024. But in the meantime, it now seems that learners will be taught to do it properly, because official rules are going to be published by the French authorities. Now, at least one source is speculating that by creating this new set of rules and saying that they will be officially taught, it implies that a decision has actually been already made that at the end of the trial, filtering and lane splitting will be allowed right across France. Whether that's true or not, we'll only find out in a couple of years' time. However, what we do know is that over in Denmark, police will seize your bike if it's ridden in what they are calling an insane manner. Now, there's often a good chuckle to be had when the meaning of something written in a foreign language gets lost in translation into English, but in this case, despite the hilarity on a certain website, it seems that it's actually a fair warning. The new rules came in back in March 2021, with stricter penalties for bad driving, and that's why the Danish term has been translated into English to insane driving. Now, of course, I think as relatively few of us were considering foreign trips at that time due to yet another lockdown, this story probably went largely unnoticed here in the UK, but it is worth being aware that the rules don't apply just to Danes, but also to foreign visitors too. And as well as prison sentences, the police have the option of seizing and selling the vehicle at an auction. Here's the kicker. You don't have to own the vehicle which is seized. It can happen to a borrowed, leased, or rented vehicle, which can also be confiscated and sold, which would leave you rather out of pocket when you don't return the vehicle that you rented. So, no blowing past police speed traps in Denmark, because you're riding a rental bike and expecting the ticket to get lost in the post somewhere. You may not have a bike to hand back to the rental company. Okay, so something there to definitely be aware of if you're planning on heading to Denmark. It's a country I've never visited, actually. I must get around to doing it one day. Right, okay. As you probably know, the NEC show happened at the end of November, beginning of December, for the first time in 2 years. And one of the bikes that appeared was this one, which I thought was fairly interesting. You may not agree, but it's the WMC 300FR. So FR presumably stands for First Responder, because as you can see, this one's logoed up in police colours. And WMC stands for White Motorcycle Concepts, who you may recall from a show some months back, because they built a speed record attempt motorcycle which featured a large duct running right through the middle of the machine. Now, WMC have been working closely with Northants Police to understand their requirements and to create a motorcycle which is specially designed for their needs, and that's it. Now, if you think you recognise the bike, you're probably not wrong. It is actually a Yamaha 300 Tri-City or Tricity. I never know how you're supposed to pronounce that. It comes with a 292cc single-cylinder four-stroke motor, but here's the interesting bit. WMC have also added what they call hybrid power assist. So the bike now has a pair of 56-volt, 12-amp hour lithium-ion batteries attached to the machine, and the batteries are what powers the bike at the low speed end of the spectrum. And the idea is to significantly improve fuel consumption. Now, the batteries are swappable, and when they're off the bike, they can be charged from a standard 3-pin socket. So that means the machine also avoids the need to rely on any charging infrastructure, which is still being put in place. Now, the petrol engine itself only kicks in at higher speeds, at which point the bike's second feature is likely to become more useful, and that's the Venturi Duct. It's the same sort of thing that was fitted to the world speed record attempt bike, and essentially, as you can see, it's a hole through the middle of the machine. Now, the bike also has, you may have noticed, sort of cowlings over the wheels, and those are said to be aerodynamically designed to actually push the air into this tunnel. Um, and it is claimed to significantly reduce the overall frontal wind resistance of a motorcycle, which is, of course, the big bugbear of conventional bikes. Um, with the combined use of the battery power at low speed and the reduced aerodynamic drag at high speed when the petrol engine is working, the bike is said to reduce carbon emissions by up to 50% of the standard Yamaha. And of course, if you reduce the wind resistance, presumably, if the gearing's right, it could go a bit faster too. Now, it's true that the aerodynamics of a standard motorcycle are pretty horrible. The humble house brick is apparently more streamlined than the average bike. But I would guess that the twin front wheel setup that you see on a bike like this is actually um, even less aerodynamic than a standard single-wheeled front motorcycle. However, I would point out that having gone to all the trouble of smoothing the airflow through the machine, it seems rather odd that the bike has a pair of panniers and a top box sat on a rack behind the rider. Um, that must be losing a big chunk of the bike's aerodynamic gains. Now, it's hardly likely that a police bike will ever need to carry a passenger. So I'm really surprised that they haven't actually incorporated some custom bodywork, which actually has some drag tested storage. So, yes, what you win with the duct, you maybe lose with the panniers there. Um, The bike is said to be ready to go into service, and one big plus, of course, is that being a three-wheeler with the front wheels widely spaced, it means the WMC 300FR can be ridden on a car license. Pointing out that the police are only 2 fleet cycles away from having to meet the target set by central government for zero tailpipe emission vehicles. Nick Adderley, who's Chief Constable of Northants Police and the UK Police lead for motorcycles, said, "We need vehicles that are fit for purpose." So it will be interesting, I think, to see if a bike like this appears on the road with the police riding it. Right, okay, so just before we go into our final item, which is the better biking tip for the day, where I'll be talking about why we should be keeping left approaching a blind crest. Don't forget, if you do enjoy the show, you can pop over to my coffee page and support me over there. And £3 buys me a coffee, and it gets you access to around 800 better biking articles, and more are being added every week. So it's probably the biggest resource out there on the internet anywhere for rider information. So £3 gets you a month's access. £3 a month gets you unlimited access. So there we go. Do come and support me and keep these shows going, and keep me adding to that archive. Right. Okay. So on to the final item then. Now, virtually every day, there's a fairly tragic report of a fatal motorcycle crash in my newsfeed. The vast majority do leave me wondering exactly what happened, because beyond the various facts, usually the only news that you get, the only information you get, is actually an appeal from the police, because I haven't got any. But occasionally, I do get a report on an inquest which investigated the circumstances of a crash, and that's what appeared this week from a coroner's court in Northallerton in Yorkshire. The court was investigating the circumstances that led to a head-on collision between 2 motorcycles. Very sadly, one of those was being ridden by a father who was actually being followed by his daughter on another bike. At the time, the police reports simply said that the bikes collided on the 6108 Masham to Leybourne Road, which is just outside the village of Masham in Yorkshire. A policeman for North York's police said a blue BMW 1200 RT motorcycle was travelling along the road from the direction of Leybourne, and a red Moto Guzzi motorbike was travelling the opposite direction towards Leybourne when the 2 vehicles collided. The 2 riders, sadly, Michael Linus, who was 57, and Martin Ragg, who was 59, both died at the scene. Now, it's a road I happen to know reasonably well because it's part of one of my training routes that I use when I'm running my courses from Grassington in Yorkshire. And we actually stop for lunch on some of those sessions at the nearby Jervaux Abbey. And I'm pretty sure that there'll be a lot of other riders who know this route too. Now, the crash happened at around 11:50 in the morning on April 25th last year, which happened to be a Sunday. A Masham parish councillor said that the stretch of the road where it happened is a one where bikers, quote, tend to travel at speed on. There's a lot of hills and corners. It's dangerous from that point of view. So, what did the coroner's court investigation add to the bare facts of that head on collision? Well, the inquest actually heard that Mr. Linus and Mr. Ragg were approaching a blind summit from opposite directions, and the Mr. Ragg was actually positioning his bike to overtake a Mazda MX-5 when the crash happened. Um, the conclusion of the coroner was that although the eyewitness statements conflicted, the forensic evidence from the crash site showed that Mr. Ragg's BMW motorcycle was actually in Mr. Linus's lane when the two bikes collided. Mr. Linus's daughter, Eve, had been riding behind her father, and she said, "I was just behind. There was a bike on the wrong side of the road, on our side of the road. I saw it, and there was nothing I could do." Now, Mr. Linus was actually described as a passionate motorcyclist who owned around 13 bikes, and his interest was actually buying and restoring motorcycles. And the Moto Guzzi 500 he'd been riding on the day of the crash was one of those bikes he'd restored. Now, what about the other rider? Well, in a statement, Andrew Whiting, who was a friend who'd been riding behind Mr. Ragg before the crash, he said he did not see him cross to the other side of the road to overtake, and initially thought the crash was caused by Mr. Ragg's bike locking up. But the Mazda driver, one Brian Ramsey, said that he recalled Mr. Ragg's motorbike being in his blind spot and overtaking his car on a blind summit in the moments before the crash. So, evidence given by the Yorkshire Police collision investigator actually confirmed that the point of impact was on the northbound carriageway. The rider was travelling, the overtaking rider was going south, of course, and that he also confirmed that the road had double solid white lines down the centre, which indicate no overtaking. So the North Yorkshire Assistant Coroner, Oliver Longstaff, accepted the evidence, saying it's far more likely than not that Mr. Ragg was offside of the double white lines. Now, that's the sad state of affairs on that particular story. But the fact is that on head-on collisions between motorcycles aren't actually that rare. One year I was on the Isle of Man. I was riding around one part of the TT circuit, and when 4 people were killed in a head-on collision between 2 bikes on the other side of the course. Now, we know, or at least we should know, that if the centre line goes solid on our side of the road, it means do not cross. Now, why would we want to cross the centre line? Well, the main reason, of course, is because we might want to overtake. So, what's the white line trying to tell us? This is the important consideration, really. There's the legal aspect of don't cross it because it's illegal, but try to work out what the highway engineer is trying to tell us when he paints a solid line down the middle of the road. Well, basically, what it's implying is that we don't have a clear enough view of the road ahead to be able to make a decision appropriately, or that the straight isn't long enough for us to make a safe pass. Now, one of the most useful clues, therefore, is where the center line opens up again, because this is the point at which the highway engineer believes we can see clearly, or if the road ahead is, if our view is not blocked by other vehicles, of course, and we should have enough space to make a safe overtake. And sometimes people come around a corner and they see the solid line extending into the distance, and they think, well, I can see it's safe to overtake here. But ask yourself why it isn't. Well, the reason is often that there is a second hazard beyond the first that may not be immediately obvious. Maybe there is a second blind crest beyond the first one. Maybe there's a second blind bend beyond the first one that, again, we cannot quite see yet. Or maybe there's another hazard, something else that we can't see easily. Perhaps there is a side turning just out of sight. So if the white line extends beyond a point where it seems that there in fact is an overtaking opportunity, have another look, think again. Don't think, somebody's just painted that white line because I don't like things overtaking. Think again, have another look. Having said that, many roads do have white lines running down the middle for long distances, and that is in fact is if you come out of Masham heading towards Leybourne, you will find that there is a good long stretch of solid line leaving the village. So why is that there? Well, sometimes it's simply because traffic is heavy and they are attempting to discourage overtaking on a stretch where previously mistakes have been made and there have been collisions. And we have to remember when we're riding a bike that what looks like an easy overtake to us isn't necessarily an easy overtake for another vehicle. So a bike like a BMW 1200 will have a considerable amount of acceleration, but other vehicles won't have that kind of zip, and they will need much longer stretches to pass another vehicle. And they'll come back to this in just a moment when I recount a little story, something that happened to me. So unfortunately, as this incident shows, riders do choose to cross these solid lines. And I have to say, when they are painted over long distances, it can be frustrating to be caught behind a slower vehicle. I find myself getting frustrated at times, but simply the matter is we need to bite the bullet and restrain ourselves. We need to rein it in. So what if we're coming the other way? Well, quite simply, if we're looking at a solid line and thinking, I'm not going to cross it, that's not enough. We need to ask ourselves, what happens if somebody else does? We have to ask that question because, and of course, it's not just bikers that get it wrong. Other vehicles can end up on the wrong side of the white line too. And remember what I just said about lack of acceleration. Now, years ago, I was a trainer down at Cinque Ports. They're now closed bike school at Leeds on the Kent coast. And my sunny day route was a nice, mostly back roads, and it took me over one stretch of nice, quiet country lane. The one stretch is actually wide and well surfaced. It's pretty straight. There are good views just about anywhere, and there are only a few buildings and entrances to worry about. And this is one example of that stretch of road. But what you'll notice is it's downhill. And although you can see in the distance there's a bit of a kink, notice the blind crest directly in front of you. The problem is you can see down that stretch of road, and from a distance that crest doesn't appear nearly so obvious. So it's quite easy to set off into an overtake and not actually see that crest. So as a biker going down there, I would be looking at that blind crest and thinking, hang on a minute, how tight is it? How much of a drop is there on the other side of it? Could a vehicle be hidden from my view? And I'll give you a little tip on how you can work out how abrupt the drop is. I'm just zoomed in on the picture a bit there for you. And what I want to point out, look at the width of the road where it disappears and notice where the grass verges are. And then follow the road visually over the crest, see where the car is that's just disappearing into the dip itself, and notice again how wide the road is beyond it. And what you'll see is that where the road reappears is probably less than half the width of the road where it vanishes. There's a big discontinuity where the grass verges on either side of the road come in, so there is a visual warning that there is actually a steep drop. The narrower the road beyond the crest appears, the steeper the drop that you're looking at. So there is a very useful clue for you when you're assessing something like this, which may not be so obvious from far back. So what can possibly go wrong on a road like this? Well, one Saturday morning, I was approaching this crest from the direction of the photo, when what I spotted was the top of a coach coming the other way up the hill. Now, what did I do? Well, actually, I slowed down, and not much, but I did slow down a bit, and I moved to the left just in case there was somebody coming the other way who was overtaking towards the blind crest. And damn me, if a moment later a car didn't appear over the crest alongside the coach, desperately trying to complete the overtake. If I'd maintained a right of centre position there because there's a cottage on the near side, I would have met that car just about at the top of the rise. It's entirely possible that I wouldn't actually have been able to take some evasive action, and I wouldn't be here to tell you the story. But the thing is that having slowed a bit and shifted away from the centre line, when the car did appear, I was actually able to brake hard, get right over as tight to the left as I possibly could, and we actually managed to avoid each other by a metre or so to spare. And frankly, by the time I got to work, about 15 minutes later, I'd stopped shaking. Now, as it happens, this line doesn't have a solid line over it. But quite clearly, nobody should be overtaking towards a blind crest. But as I say, it's not always easy to see how steep a crest like this is and how much you're missing as you come the other way. Remember, from the perspective of the driver coming the other way, the road just disappears and then reappears a bit further up the road again. So whether the car driver made a mistake or took a gamble on getting past that didn't pay off is pretty irrelevant. I found the situation unfolding in front of myself and I had to deal with it. So I must admit that after that, I was probably even more cautious over that blind crest as I rode over it. I never, of course, met anything else coming over that crest, but I have to say that that didn't apply to all the riders around me. On one memorable occasion, I was actually on the way into work when a bunch of blokes out on a breakfast run all piled past me. I was obviously going a bit too slow for them because they all overtook me on that very blind crest where I'd had that near miss. Now, funnily enough, I was on the ferry to Ostend just a couple of weeks after the incident. And I was headed to the race circuit at Chimay, actually, as it happens, to watch the racing with my buddy Keith. And while we were actually sat on the ferry, for no particular reason, I just happened to mention this keep left approach to a blind crest. And I was actually somewhat surprised that he wasn't actually convinced by my argument. And then what should we witness on the way back? Well, we were catching a short queue of traffic up. The driver of the final vehicle spotted us catching it up and decided that he was going to get to the front of this queue ahead of us. So he pulled out to overtake the other vehicles. And it was deja vu because there was a blind crest ahead, and he ran out of space just as he was overtaking the last vehicle in that queue. So he was heading over this blind crest on the wrong side of the road, and what should appear the other way? Well, it was a motorcycle, which was sat fairly far out to the right. Now, somehow they missed each other. I have no idea how they did it because I didn't look. I was actually already on the brakes and I was looking for an escape route because I was convinced that this was going to be a big accident. Right, okay, so that's it for today. Remember the dangers of blind crests and remember why solid lines are there. Last thing, again, don't forget the Science of Being Seen tonight, the special show where I'll be telling you why your peripheral vision may be up to 15 seconds out of date. Do come along and make a visit if you're possibly capable, and hopefully I will see you at 8 p.m. this evening. If I don't see you, enjoy the day, and whilst you're out there on the road, don't forget to stay safe. Take it easy out there and stay shiny side up. Oh, I've lost me run out video. Where's it gone? Here it is. Right, at last.